13 years ago, I exchanged marriage vows with my wife. As part of that exchange of vows, I privately made a promise to myself. And that promise was never to beat my wife. Now, that promise to myself might come across as a bit strange to most people. But I had to make that promise to myself because I had gotten to a place where I was scared of myself. The reason I was scared, I'd like to take you to my childhood. In 1980, we moved into a new neighborhood. And in the time it takes to offload household furniture from the van into the house, two things happened. The first one, I made a new friend. His name was Sam. The second thing, I got into a fight. The reason for the fight was because myself and another boy could not agree about who could beat the other. So the only way to resolve that difference was naturally by fighting. That fight marked my entry into a world where we used violence to settle differences. We used violence to establish hierarchy. We used violence as play and play as violence. And in this world, you had to be a victim or you had to protect yourself. Because where there's violence, you're always going to meet boys who are stronger than you, bigger than you. And when faced with such a boy, you had to make sure that even if they beat you, they had to learn a lesson never to attempt to bully you in future. And you did that by exacting a price into their bullying. So when you are fighting them, you hit them with a stone, with a knife, with a fork, anything, so that not only they would learn the lesson, but even other bullies who were watching the fight would know that that boy, you do not pick on him. And that was the only way to protect yourself. The second thing I learned when growing up was that whereas boys, we fought a lot physically, physical violence, the girls, on the other hand, used words. So you might call it verbal violence. They reduced you, they cut you down, they belittled you. And you knew which girls not to mess with, because you knew they were going to reduce you and finish you on the spot. Girls were so good at the communication game that a girl didn't have to really say anything to insult you. There's this thing that the girls did. When a girl looked at you from head to toe and back again, and if you were at the receiving end of that look, you knew what was being communicated. And the fun part was trying to find a boy trying to tell a teacher to say, she looked at me. Because he felt injured, he felt insulted. But it was difficult to package it and report it. So that is one of the things that happened. So I want you to imagine this world in which this young boy and this young girl grow up. Both of them developing a specific set of tools, of software, to protect themselves, to use the same tools for aggression and defense. Over time, these become hardwired into their personality. It becomes like software. They don't have to think about it, they don't have to practice, it just comes naturally. Now, I want you to understand that whereas as boys, we did a lot of fighting, and as we got older into junior secondary, that violence just became worse. I want you to imagine when this girl and boy fought, even as boys, when we fought, it was violent, but when a girl and boy fought, it was a bit more violent because there was a little bit more desperation from both sides. You see, if you were a boy and you fought with a girl, the fight had to be definitive. There was nothing like a draw. You had to come out victor without question. And for the girl, you have to remember that she is literally fighting for her life. She is fighting with someone who is stronger, who has got more experience. The CV with physical violence is longer. Now, I want you to imagine a world where these two grow up and marry each other. Now, I don't care how much happily ever after this marriage is going to be, but there is going to be friction. There are going to be differences, there's going to be frustrations. And when this happens, you have two people who have the triggers for each other's violence. When the woman or girl becomes verbal, it triggers physical violence. And the physical violence triggers verbal violence. In short, you create the perfect storm. The perfect storm without a referee. And that is where we are today. Today, we are in a society where we have started to see violence escalate in marriages, among couples and partners, and we're surprised that this is so. This violence is so prevalent that more than half the women, close to half the women, have experienced it. And the tragedy is that many of these women cannot even report it. We are told more than 10% of the women who have experienced violence of one form or the other have never told anyone. The only people who know is the man and herself. That is the extent of our problem. But this is not the end of the problem. The real problem lies with how much we have come to accept this violence. This violence is so acceptable to the extent that women who are at the receiving end most of the time of this violence justify it in specific instances. So, for instance, women agree that in certain instances, violence is inevitable. The first one, for instance, 32% of women agree that if a woman burns food, the husband's violence is justified. 42% agree that if a woman argues with the husband, she is inviting violence. And if he beats her, it's justifiable. 42% agree that if a woman goes out without permission, the man is justified in beating her. These are Zambian statistics. 42% agree that if a woman neglects the children, the husband is justified in beating her. The next one is shocking. 37% of women who are in relationships think that a man is justified in beating her if she refuses the man's sex. That is 1 in 3 women in Zambia. If you look at the stats I've given you, it's further disturbing to note that 61% of women agree with one of the reasons I have given. That's more than half of the women in this country think that violence as a response to provocation, irritation, disappointment is justified. I'm sure you agree with me when you look at these stats that we must end this culture of violence. We need to end this culture of violence because the results of this culture of violence are there for all of us to see. In the media, everywhere we look, we see the results of this violence. We see a society in which people look at compromise, dialogue, reasoning with one another as a weakness, where they see bullying and violence as strength. My proposal is that we need to correct the situation. And the first thing is we need to make some investments in the future generation. The first thing we need to do is to watch closely how our children are learning to resolve conflict, how they are reacting to disappointment, how they are able to conduct themselves when they are annoyed, because we need to ensure that the software we grew up with is not transmitted to our children. But when doing this, I want us to bear one thing in mind. We are not going to teach our children to be non-violent through words. We are not going to say, don't be violent, and beat up our wives and husbands and expect that they won't pick it up. We have to make sure that our words and actions speak the same language. The second thing is that all of us have got self-control, tremendous amount of self-control. I want you to imagine for a moment an interaction between a boss and a subordinate in which the boss, having wrong information about something, is very annoyed. You will see the subordinate trying to reason with the boss, trying to make them understand what happened, why it happened. You take that same person who, despite being showered with insults, was struggling and making every effort to reason with the other. They go home, they meet with their friend or spouse, and in that same interaction, you will see them behave differently. Why is it so? This is evidence that as human beings, we make a conscious decision that in one interaction, I will exercise self-restraint, and in the other, I won't. And subconsciously, we have grouped people into these provinces. For this group, I will not exercise self-restraint. Anything they say and do which annoys me, I will slap them. But for this group, I will be reasonable with them, I will put up with them, I will be understanding. My proposal is that we need to extend the same consideration to everyone. We should decide to be reasonable with as many people as possible, so that we can avoid a situation where when someone bashes your car, the first reaction you have is to get out of your car and take out the wheel spanner. That is the kind of society we are living in, where people have already decided how they are going to react to something. You hear it in everyday conversations. If she cheated on me, I am going to. If he did that to me, I would. So people have already decided how they are going to behave when faced with provocation. My proposal is that we should make the opposite. We should make a decision at that point knowing how we are going to play out when something bad happens. So we need to rewrite our software. We need to introspect and gain self-awareness. The other thing we need to understand is that no matter the situation, you catch someone cheating on you, someone bashes into you, someone steals. After all is said and done, when we come down, we have to make a decision. We have to make a decision to take it to the police, or to resolve it out of court, or to divorce them, or to leave them. Bottom line, every situation which you meet, you have to make a decision. My proposal to you and everyone is that I hope today is the day when we make a conscious choice to decide to do away with violence and adopt a society and create a society where violence of any type is no longer acceptable. I thank you.